Right, now it's my turn. We started looking for the Dragonfly about 5 or 6 years ago because we read the book too, and we got the fever as well. But I'll go back a bit further. Back in 1960, I had a yacht which was a Z-class yacht, which I actually sold to Chadwick. And I spent probably about 3 hours with him at the time. He tested it and everything, and then he sailed it back across the estuary, back to his home in Rocking Horse Road. And about 3 months later, I was interested in photographing the deep freeze aircraft out at Harewood. And I happened to run into him again at Harewood, where I spent another 2 or 3 hours talking to him, and at that time he was putting a patch on the rear tail of the Domini. He didn't have the Dragonfly at that time, but he was explaining why it was on there and how the ice off the propeller cuts the fabric and that sort of thing. So I got to know him quite well. And then when he went missing, I came home from work at that time, and my mother said to me, "That fella that you sold the yacht to, he's gone missing." Which, it's puffing, is it? Anyway, it sort of affected me a wee bit because I happened to know him, but after a while it had gone off. It was always known as the honeymoon plane. But about 8 years ago we were making a film with a Kingston Flyer and down at Kingston, and we wanted to use a Dragonfly, not a Dragonfly, a tiger moth to fly over the top of the Kingston Flyer, just to make it a little bit different. And Colin Smith down there, we were talking to him, and while we were talking there was a bookcase standing behind us, and I happened to read the edge of the book on it when it was on its edge, and I noticed Chadwick's name written on it, and I pulled it out and I said, I knew that person, and we talked about it a bit, and then I put the book back, and when I came back out again, my family said to me, "Did you get the book?" And I said, "No, I'm not going to pay that much for it at this stage." And anyway, they talked me into getting the book. Well, I spent about 2 days, I think, reading that book, and in the finish I was convinced that we could make a film of this whole thing. So that's how we got into it. We started making the film, and we prepared for it. We did about 2 years research. Now, we researched it in a totally different way to everybody else. We came in from I'd spent probably 20 years with the Forest Service, and I spent a lot of time in the bush, so I knew the bush quite well. And we went in with tents, and we found that was no good, so we towed a caravan in, and we had to cross 3 rivers with this caravan, and that was quite interesting, going through the rivers with a caravan. You got water flowing on one side and out the other. But anyway, the other thing is too is the area that we're searching in is the Ohau area. Now, Richard Waugh's father wrote in his book Turbulent Years, and through that book, and 2 or 3 times, he says, "Where do I believe the Dragonfly is?" And he says, "I believe it's in the Ohau area." Now, there's a good reason for that, because it was actually visibly seen going down the west side of Lake Pukaki, yeah. It was seen going down the western side of Lake Pukaki, and it was also seen flowing over a person who was digging a ditch where Twizel is now. And then it went round and it went up Lake Ohau. Now, there was 5 farmers, one after another, who had heard it fly over at the same time, and their stories all fitted together, each one of them. Now, we've got Evan Blanche here today, who was the deer culler who was at the base camp when it flew over, and he's a person who grew up with aircraft at Wigram, and he's been a big insight into what we're actually doing, because he sort of led us in the path and explained a lot of things to us. And Evan, you're here somewhere, I know, but here he is over here. He has been the backbone of what we're doing. If it wasn't for him, I don't think we would have carried it on. But we've led ourselves right up into the Hopkins River and into the Huxley. Now we spent 6 weeks in there a couple of years ago, before the earthquake, and we stayed in the caravan. We did grid searching. Now I'll let Adam talk about that because he's more into it than what I am and how that works. But that's basically how we got into it, was the interest in the filming side of it, which people have said, if you don't find the aircraft, what are you going to do? Well, we've still got to film. But it's become part of us. The families that went in there, their relatives have become part of us. And I'd just like to say today, the encouragement that those relatives have actually given us have been probably part of why we're doing it. But I also have something. It was said this morning that how much of the aircraft would be still left, because it was a wooden fabric aircraft. Well, up in the Hope Saddle, up at the back of Murchison, there was another aircraft crashed up there in 1944. It was also a wooden canvas aircraft. It was an early model of the Dragonfly. So we went up to the crash site to have a look and see what we could find. Now you've got to remember that aircraft, 2 weeks after it crashed, they took the engines and the undercarriages out and anything like that. And then we believe that the aircraft was smashed up because when we found it, we found no pieces were not together. They were all broken up. But in those pieces, we never found any rotten wood. And here we have some of it here. That's the strut. Now that was 1944, and it still has the paint on it. Now that strut is only ordinary steel. It's not anything other than just ordinary steel. There's a bit of aluminium on the bottom of it, but the paint's still on that steel. Now that's in the Hope River, which is in the, well, more or less on the west coast, in the wet part of the coast. That's a piece of woodwork. It's still got the bolts on it, and still got the paint on it. Now, that's a piece of fabric. It's all in bits because we pulled it out of the ground, but that won't rot because it's got what they call dope paint, aircraft paint on it. Now, if that hadn't been played around with or smashed up, it would probably be still in quite big pieces. But that's not rotten. There's no rot in it. So, how much of the aircraft are we going to find? Well, I believe most of it will still be there. I don't believe it caught fire, because we spoke to Don Middleton, who searched the Ohau area the day afterwards, the morning afterwards, and he said himself that if it had caught fire, there probably would have been still some smouldering, or there would have been dark patches and that sort of thing. So, and the other thing is too, we know now that it's not out in the open. It's not on the side of a mountain, because the search itself was so big that they would have seen if it was out in the open. So we know it's in the bush. But where? Anyway, Adam, I'll leave it over to you.